by knowing someone's history and understanding where they came from, you understand what they're saying now. And so I think it's important for us to capture these people who made big changes or who in the industry for a long time, so that people who come forward will know, okay, this is what it was like before, this is what it's like now. And it's to encourage young people to stay involved, stay engaged, get involved in the energy industry in Trinidad. So yeah. Right. Good afternoon, everybody. This is David Gabriel from the GSTT, and we have here, is it Dr. Neal Alleyne?
It is correct. It's Dr. Neal Alleyne, yes.
Right, Dr. Neal Alleyne. He's currently a lecturer or assistant professor at UTT. He was a petroleum engineer for a number of years at first Amoco and then BPTT. Worked on a number of different departments, and I think he ended up looking at the regulatory framework and financial part of aspect of drilling and exploring and developing gas fields in Trinidad and in other parts of the world. And currently you're lecturing at UTT, is that correct, Dr. Alleyne?
That's correct, very correct, okay. Yes.
All right, this is a series that we're starting to kind of capture some of the, what I would call living legends, or some of the people that were around from what we would call the local genesis of Trinidad and Tobago professionals in the industry. So I don't know if you could correct me about this, but this kind of started in the 1970s, right? 60s and 70s you had it. Is that?
That's when I began, yes. I don't know whether I'll call myself a legend, but thanks for being, really thanks for being here and for being part of this interview. But so I'll share my experiences over the last couple of years, about 50 years in the industry. Wow. So that's my background. So we can talk about that.
Well, I should say one of my relatives is from that time, and he talks a lot about, there was a sort of a handover from foreign-based professionals leading the industry or the technical side and handing over to a lot of local professionals in the 70s and so on. Dr. Alleyne is part of that cadre of local professionals. So in this year, we lost a couple of what I would call leaders. So you had Dr. Bertrand, who died, Mahindra Nath as well, who died, and they were pivotal to the starting of the geoscience program at UE, and they helped a lot of professionals. So I kind of thought, we need an archive so we can speak to some of these individuals and have a place people can go back. And more importantly, we're kind of in a downturn in the industry right now, in terms of jobs, and the industry is changing from oil and gas into gas and then to cleaner energy. So we can talk about the beginning of your career, the middle of your career, and then where you think things are going now and where young engineers and geoscientists should focus their energies going forward. Where do you think the industry is going? So we'll start.
Well, my first exposure to petroleum engineering actually came when I was in A-levels. That was before what preceded the Cape. And in the first year of A-levels, I went on a 1-week camp sponsored by Texaco. It was a living camp in their operations. We lived in Pointe-a-Pierre. A group of us, all from schools. I think someone from schools up north. From St. Mary's, I went to St. Mary's. Guys were there from QRC. We all went down there, and they exposed us to petroleum engineering. So that was my first exposure to petroleum engineering and to that business on the whole. Living up north, I wasn't very familiar with that business, and it was my first exposure. I found it very interesting. And that event really sparked my interest in petroleum engineering. And eventually I studied at Imperial College on a Texaco scholarship. So that's how I got my start in the area of petroleum engineering. So I started with that first camp, sponsored by Texaco, and then studying petroleum engineering at Imperial College.
Okay. So did you have a choice to go to Imperial, or that's where the Texaco scholarship?
That's where the scholarship was. They sent petroleum engineers to. The scholarship was in petroleum engineering, and it was at Imperial College. Cool. That was a good experience, by the way, being there.
Yeah. Any? If you could pick one memory, what was your best memory of Imperial and London studying, coming from Trinidad?
what I really found it was so interesting is that the Imperial College that part is in South Kensington. It's a very very expensive, very kind of historical part of London, right? In fact, right next to the Royal Albert Hall. And I remember we are next to the Royal School of Music, and I remember being in lectures and hearing some violinist or some oboe player or some singer taking rehearsing their rehearsing. So that was the environment in which we studied.
Right.
So that was interesting. I just remember that as a curiosity as when we were studying at Imperial.
So arts and engineering intertwined in the course.
Well, more or less, yes.
So you finished, it took what, 3 to 4 years in those years? How long
A
did it
3-year
take?
program. So I finished in 1974.
Right. And I'm just interested, did you go by boat or by plane? And what was that like, taking a plane?
It was by plane. It was by plane. In fact, in those days, the British Airways had a special international side. So it's called BOAC, British Overseas Airway Corporation. That all eventually became British Airways, but they had separated their international flights from their companies from their domestic flights. But that has since changed. So we flew there, a long flight. In those days, you couldn't fly non-stop across the Atlantic, so we'll stop somewhere in the Azores or somewhere where you have to refuel before you make the entire journey. Much longer trip, but that's what it was in those days.
Okay, so you came back home in 1974. Were you fettered? You came back, you're an Imperial boy, you're a petroleum engineer. What was the next thing? What was the next step for you?
When I came back, I took the risk, of taking a job at Amoco, working on the offshore on the East Coast. They had been brand new there. Instead of taking the status quo, which was a Texaco job on land, Texaco was very big and very well developed, but Amoco was something new. And someone said, you should take a look at they're doing new things. It's a new theater. It was offshore. So I worked there. So I started working offshore the East Coast in 74. So that's just where I started.
And you were, at that time, was the office based in Mayaro or Port of Spain? Or?
It wasn't, there was a Galliota, it wasn't Galliota. There was also a Port of Spain office, but the main operation out of Galliota, which is itself at that time in 1974, it was a far cry from what it was and what it is now, but very rural area. But that's where it was. We worked off Galliota.
Right. So I know that you're from Arima. Did that mean commuting every day, or did you live down?
No, we lived down. It meant living down. So what happened was you kind of, because of the hours of work and the commuting, you have to go offshore. We typically will live down there. Sometimes rented property. Some of the engineers will get together and they will share a house, and you will probably commute on weekends, but you live down there during the week. So typically you were down there during the week, and you might go back to Arima on a weekend.
Okay.
If I wasn't going offshore, which happened very often in any case.
Why did you join the energy industry? What did you think was better with petroleum engineering and energy as opposed to the other options you had?
Well, having done petroleum engineering, you sort of almost have you have kind of made a bit of a specialization, and you're very well suited to be in that area. You're doing what you have been trained on and what you've kind of done a lot of studying in, so that it's a bit of it is a specialization, but it really prepares you for the world of work. So you can enter the world almost ready to go from day one.
Okay. I didn't realize that, because I know like when I started in physics, and I was a physicist going into geophysics and seismic processing, you didn't know anything. There was nothing that you would have learned in school that would have prepared you for that. But with petroleum, you knew a lot of the principles and concepts, so you hit the ground running. Yeah.
Definitely. In fact, you got in there and you're doing what you did in class.
Wow. That's amazing. So that's a good point, I guess, for people thinking about going into petroleum engineering. It prepares you for entering industry. I guess you said 1974. I know Amoco was here for a time and then it flipped over to BP. What was the most exciting part of your early career? What was your standout memory for being at Amoco?
So when I got to Amoco, they were developing the offshore field. They already developed the teak field, and they were beginning to develop the Saman field. And I was placed in the Saman field. And what happened there, the challenges in the Saman field were different from those in the Teak. In Saman, the challenge was really log analysis in shaly sands. And the really exciting part of that is developing the ability to do accurate analysis offshore without the benefit of a computer or computer programs. So things weren't as developed as they are now in terms of supporting computer programs. It's all done by hand. But the thing was doing good analysis in shaly sands. And that was a new challenge because the sands in Teak were much cleaner. So the experience has not been one of how do you really analyze these rather shaly sands and get proper analysis. So that was really what was exciting there. And in fact, that has actually stayed with me all my life, is that I still find that I do a lot of work in the area of formation evaluation, also based on those shaly sands.
So that was the most exciting thing for you, dealing with a tough problem and dealing with limited data. So you had logs, little to no seismic, and is that what you're saying? No.
But so the analysis was really because the response of the tools then in shaly sands aren't as clear as they are in clean sands. So the impact of the shale on the analysis was very important. Now there were computer programs which can be run post running your logs, if you have a full suite of logs to do some computer analysis. But in those days, you were offshore, having to do things with paper copies and making analyses in real time on the rig to decide whether or not your well had adequate accumulation of hydrocarbons, which will warrant the next step in the process. In other words, did you have enough pay in the well to warrant setting casing, for example? And those decisions were made out there based upon those logs.
Wow. So you acquired the log and you had to make that decision within a few hours. Do we set casing? Do we move on? Okay.
Exactly. Wow. Exactly. Yes.
That's interesting. So for me, having been born in the 1980s, I remember like 80s into 90s, there was this kind of, my parents called it like a collapse in the oil industry. And then there was a transition into gas. And I know that there was a sort of a movement from Amoco into BP. And a lot of, what should I say, experienced professionals over the last 10 years have gone through that. So for instance, a lot of people who may have been at Tixaman and Pui at BP are now Perenco employees, right? Because the asset would have been sold. What was your experience of that? On a personal level, what was the biggest lesson that you learned in that transition from Amoco to BP? What was that like for you, like as a professional and then personally?
Well, I'll talk to you first. The Amoco to BP transition occurred in the late 90s. That occurred in 1999, 98, 99.
Okay.
Much earlier than that is when the gas development began. In fact, so when I was working at Amoco, our first gas field development, developing a gas reservoirs, was when we developed the Cassia field. And that happened in the very early 1980s. And I was involved in that. And what that exposure showed us was how different it is producing gas from producing oil. So you had that differences. So we saw that right there as we transitioned from producing, not transition, as we added gas to the portfolio. Gas developments are different from oil developments in many ways. And we saw that right there. And it's something which eventually, as we got to what we call the gas boom, you mentioned the gas, that transition to gas, the industry changed as well in response to gas is different in many ways from the point of view of how it's produced and even how you go about the business from how you produce oil. So we saw that difference there.
Right.
You mentioned the change from Amoco into BP. That happened, I said, in the late 90s. And to me, the big change there was that BP brought forward a business understanding of what you do, which is much greater than I had with Amoco. Amoco is very strong in technology, yes, but BP combined that with a very good understanding of the business. In other words, they made it very clear that engineering was in service of a business objective. And you saw
Okay.
that link between engineering and business. And that
Right.
was that I think was my biggest change. I went from Amoco into BP is what I saw. And it's a very important, very pertinent focus that engineering is not an end in itself. It is there
Right.
to achieve a business objective.
Right. So it sounds to me, in my limited experience of that end of the oil and gas industry, as very much upstream, that BP was concerned about, okay, we're not just applying technology because it's there, we're applying technology in the service of, is this going to be economic? You know,
Yes.
is this going to make us enough money if we spend A, B, C, D with this engineering solution or technology solution? How much is it going to bring back to the business?
Yes, clearly. You said it very well. Very well put.
So BP brought a business focus to the assets in Trinidad.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
And as you said,
no, I'm sure that focus was there in Amoco. It might have not been as strong in the engineering, in all engineering aspects, but with BP, it was kind of run through an entire business was seen as you're here for a business objective. That was clear.
So I guess that rolls into my next question. I guess you'd have started in mid-1970s and your career, from what I saw online, went straight through to the early 2000s. What was the biggest technology shift that you saw in engineering and in oil and gas in Trinidad over that period?
I believe the computer chip has transformed how we use technology and continues to do so even to this day. That has been one of the biggest changes in how we do engineering. The ability to model production and engineering and reservoir systems has really changed how we do business. You know, you can now pull together a lot more data and understand systems and do a lot of options and a lot more scenario planning across the full production train, which you didn't do back then as easily because you didn't have the computer horsepower. The computer, and particularly the chip, has really made that possible. I mean, we're doing things now which we couldn't have dreamt of doing it back in those days before the computer.
So like when you were deciding on a path down, when you're doing an engineering solution, you could only achievably compute one or two options, whereas
Exactly.
now you could look at a whole different set of scenarios and model them without going into the ground,
Exactly. You can model that is so important. Now, take for granted that's how we do it now, but it wasn't all of them. Now you may have picked, and as a result, the options which you explored may not have been as great a range of options to be explored, or if so, it took a lot more time to do it.
Right. So how did that change? So I know that we talk about AI and computing changing the future, but how did that change your job? How did that change what you did from 1970 to 2000?
One thing we did, it also required more of the team, and the multidisciplinary team became a natural way of doing things. In other words, you will find that reservoir engineer, or a drilling engineer, a geologist, a geophysicist, you were working on a project together. All right, it brought together that multidisciplinary team, and that team that's the new way of doing business.
Right.
And that has happened across other professions as well. True. Where because of the modeling and because you can do a more comprehensive study of situations, you can combine many more disciplines into your decisions. Things weren't done in a piecemeal manner; they were done together. Synergy is how you built synergy. So you didn't draw a map and then pass it over to the driller. You can actually do things together. And I'm sure you probably experienced that in your present workflows.
Yeah,
it changed
definitely.
The workflow considerably.
So what I'm finding now is that, like when I first started, in processing, there was a need for a generalist, someone who could do everything. Whereas now with the computing taking over part of that, so you had less people but more specialists. So you may have one processor instead of having 10 processors, you'll have one, but that leaves room for an interpreter on your processing team. That leaves room for geologists, so you get more input into the actual production of the product, which is the image that you look before you drill. And then in heritage now, in oil companies, you can get a paleontologist on board, a sedimentologist, because now you have more time and you can scenario things out quicker. So you can, I'm guessing, yeah. So I'm understanding, yeah, that I can see that now. That's just how we do business now. We have teams with lots of people. So yeah, that I didn't think about that. Recently when you kind of, I saw one of your papers talking about government regulation with really relation to finance in the oil and gas industry. Could you talk about some of your PhD and research work that you did after you left Amoco and what that was about and how did that?
Well, the research my research area was on deep water gas field developments. How to develop deep water, how to develop gas fields. And because there are a number of challenges which come with doing that. One, not only the drilling challenge, but also having had when you get it stuff to the surface, what do you do with it? Do you process it offshore and have floating facilities to doing that, or do you bring it to land? So you can now compare how those two different pathways and how your fluids which you produce might affect your decision. Okay. In other words, you might get all dry gas, and that may have a different set of options if you had a rich gas, which are a lot of liquids. The liquids are good, but then you have to handle them separately. So in other words, you have to, again, go through all those various scenarios. What if you found this? What if you found that? And how would your development scheme change based upon what you have found and where you found it? In other words, if you found a deep water reservoir close to shore, it's one thing. If it's a couple hundred miles offshore, it's a different thing. Right. So that's the area where I spent a lot of my research in for my PhD.
Okay, and how did the work that you did in your career feed into that? Was there a circle loop? Okay, so I did a lot of petroleum engineering work and I worked in industry. How did that feed into your research? And has the research you did on deep water, I should say commercialization, if I were to use that word, did that feed back into how you taught and industry itself? Was it a loop?
Well, it has fed into what we teach what I teach in my courses. And also what is happening. Look, for example, what's happening in other places like in Guyana, for example. But it's really about understanding the deep water challenge, and it's something which I'm sure as a country we have to also understand that you find something in deep water with some different decision points that if you found the same thing in shallow water, all right, in shallow water. So that's really where a lot of my research is still interested in it. In fact, and I hope that one day we will we get a chance probably somewhere to develop a deep water gas field.
Okay. So yeah, that's an interesting point. It kind of feeds into this is just a off the cuff question, but do you see Trinidad as an adjunct to the Guyana giant, if you want to call it that, because they have a huge amount of reserves. The Exxon is putting a lot of capital in. For me, they're developing from what I've read, developing most of that offshore. So they're using FPSOs, etc. Do you see Trinidad as a conduit, right? So the equipment lands here and it goes over there, that Guyana draws some of its expertise from here, or do you see Guyana as developing on its own? And how can we help? And how do you see the two countries collaborating?
Well, all development is global, and the companies which operate in Guyana are global companies. So you're looking for where do you get the best bang for your buck? And I would think that in terms of Trinidad and Guyana, the best opportunity is to sharing our knowledge with Guyana. In other words, drawing on what our experiences. And there are many of them. We don't have many in the deep water per se, but you still have experiences developing oil fields. And So I think a lot of learning which we can share with them. It may not be resource based, but with actual facilities, but in terms of what we have learned, sharing what we have learned and expertise. And if you go to Guyana, you'll find working in the Guyanese operation with people who had previously worked in Trinidad.
Correct.
All right, or worked in Trinidad operations. So
Right.
yes, sharing
and
and
knowledge transfer.
knowledge transfer one, yeah. And things we have done. We, for example, have a Ministry of Energy, which has been running leases and doing that type of work for 100 years. If you're just starting off doing it for the first time, then you may find that you can learn a lot from people who have done it for a lot. They have learned because you know what they say is that when something doesn't go right, that's how you gain experience.
Correct. So you learn a lot more from failure than.
So they say yes. So they said good judgment comes with experience, and experience comes with bad judgment.
So, so this is a question I have that comes out of my experience and my current company. So we operate a lot of mature fields.
Yes.
Right? And I wonder, there are two schools of thought. I'm wondering, how do we innovate in this environment? We're looking at I should say, fields that are aging, that are not producing at the level that they may have 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So as companies, how do you innovate in that environment, right? And then as a government, how do you encourage investment into that type of mature field? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I always think you must before you could go for, you have to begin to understand your situation, understand your problem or your situation. Be it if you want to understand the transition from oil and gas to renewables, or transition to mature fields, or whatever, you got to understand that transition, and have that understanding inform policy, so that industry can take action. In other words, the government role is right to create the environment for good investment, and of course, that environment is created if you have good understanding of what situation, what is required for to make good business. That informs the. So when I say infrastructure, sometimes I mean policy is part of infrastructure, a regulatory framework which encourages investment, supports investment, and then the industry will take necessary action.
Right.
And if you now are a property owner, so you own the resources and you get into mature fields, each situation may be different. You can't say you loot what we've done here, what we've done in another country. So you got to study what you have. And I think that is one place where we probably can do some more, both from the point of view of industry, getting studies done in academia. Academia could do very good, some little funding. You can surprise what you can do if you fund some studies and let them turn up for you the options. They won't all be good, but at least you get a chance to see, here are my options, and it gives you a basis for making some of your decisions. So that applies even for the level of the government, and the level even of industry.
Right.
Because one thing which we don't do well as a country, we haven't typically invested a lot of money in understanding our business, in research, in R&D.
Right.
If you look at R&D, for example, in places like, in some parts of the world, like Israel, 6% of the GDP goes to R&D. In the US, it's about 3.6%. Around the world, places like England and other countries, be 1.5%. Do you know what is it in Trinidad?
I mean, less than one, if any.
It's 0.0069%.
Wow.
And that was an increase
across industry and government. Yeah.
Yeah. We just do not spend a lot of money on R&D as a country. And that goes across all industries. It doesn't have to only be in energy. Anything you're doing, people know that if you want to find that new way of doing things, you've got to do some studies. So you have to commit yourself to investing some money in R&D, and how do you understand and how you get some new options developed.
Yeah.
And it's a way of life that we should develop, I would think.
Yeah, we need to change our mindsets in that a lot of people and I've seen that in industry across the different industries I've been involved in, if it was processing or selling data, you need to spend time researching and looking at the history, understanding the problem, and even sitting in the company I'm in now, I talk to some of the people who have innovated, and they're the people who understand what went before. You have to spend 6 months, 7 months coming into like a new basin. What happened before? Look at the well files, look at the wells, look at the engineering solutions that were presented before, and then come up with something. And I think sometimes, I don't know if that was your experience, but when you're in a crunch like we are, to find things, get things, do things, bring oil to the table, maybe there isn't so much of an emphasis on, let's understand what the system is. Let's look at the history.
Yes. And it also encourages you to see failure differently. Sometimes you see failure as someone to blame. But if you look at places around the world who are innovative, they know they can fail and move on to the next. Take something, you failed, or you haven't been successful. Don't call it a failure. Put it down to experience and make sure that you can learn and build on it. So, but the intention is to learn and to better understand, not to be correct. But
right.
we tend to have sometimes what is correct? No. Let's explore, see what the options are, and see what is possible, and move and go from there.
Okay, cool. That's an excellent way of looking at things. So now we'll talk a bit about what's to come, right? So there is this, in my mind, I'm speaking very broad, high level terms. We as a country and as an energy industry started off, I guess, with coal. We moved to oil, then we moved to oil and gas. And I guess the transition that is being touted is gas as a transition into clean energy. What do you think how is that going to affect Trinidad and the Caribbean in terms of energy and clean energy? How are we? What are some of the things you think we need to consider in navigating the energy roadmap over the next 20 years?
Now, first of all, I think we need to understand what's the meaning of transition. And if you're going to understand transition, you should begin by understanding very clearly what are you transitioning from and to what. And so a lot of people hear transition and they believe step change. You go from A, it's a binary from A to B. Whereas transition is really a change from, you decrease A while increasing B. And different people, different countries will have different A and different Bs. So some people, for example, like in Trinidad and Tobago, where we have oil, we have gas, all right? So we'll have a different place. Say another Caribbean country they may be simply ones who import refined products and they use that gas or that oil, to develop power. So they may have a different transition, say a country like ours, which has gas, all right? Because everybody won't always have the opportunity to go from that step from oil to gas to renewables, unless, of course, you have gas in the form of, say, of LNG, all right? So, but what I mean is, so it is very important that we understand the situation and that we communicate that or share that understanding with the country, all right? So people appreciate what we're going to do, appreciate the choices which we will make, because you are going to make choices, and people need to understand those things.
Yeah, understand what you're saying. So I like that analogy of, it's not we're going from oil and gas to clean energy. We're ramping this down and we're ramping up. These are the energies. Exactly. And depending on what your current feedstock is, and like, for instance, we probably should have a conversation about, when we talk about transition, are we talking about energy for homes and businesses? We can talk about that, but then it's a different context when talking about transport or air travel or other things, or plastic. So yeah.
And somewhere in that picture is efficiency. Now, one of the ways of getting a very bad habit is when things are subsidized, you get bad habits. All right.
Correct.
So the first thing we probably need to say, well, let's understand our energy use. And is it as efficient as it can be, even as it is right now, right where we are? Right where we are now. Are we as efficient with because if you are thinking about the emissions, you say, well, wait a minute, we have large emissions, but are the emissions which we currently have, could we have low emissions and still maintain, in other words, if you had different efficiencies? In other words, there are a lot of things we can do of that nature. So in other words, the end point is really about controlling the emissions, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
And what you measure,
so if you can make homes 20% more efficient, businesses 30% more efficient, reduce heating and cooling costs, those are things you can do now to reduce how much natural gas you consume for energy and how efficiently your cars run. All those are understood. Yeah.
And I suppose if you had more efficient on one end, you may then find you have gas to do other things with, right?
You can export more of it to make more money, right, for the country.
So yes, so this conversation should really start with understanding where you are and what can you do, and take responsibility. All right. So yeah.
I like that. I like the theme is emerging. You need to understand where you are, where you want to go, and what you can do to get there. And fully explore that. Yeah.
And I come back to my previous point about grants and funding to understand the situation. And this is, you see, academia is meant to help you understand your situation. I mean, we need to use it a lot more for those kinds of things. Understanding where we are, understanding our situations, and what are our options, and developing options. They won't all be good, they won't all work, but at least you start having a suite of options from which you can make some choices, each with its own pros and cons, I'm sure.
So my other question would be, now I'll come up with a pretty bad statement, blasé statement that I was told during my studies and after, don't go into oil and gas. I was told that in the 2000s, what would you say to someone considering the oil and gas industry now, and they're 18? Would you, one of the things I say to people is that to young graduates that I meet, I say, in 30 years, we're not going to be talking about oil and gas. We're going to talk about energy. We're going to be talking about where do you get your energy from? And I can see that BP and these companies will transition into energy companies, where they'll be using various sources of energy to supply various things. So I would say to a young graduate, focus on energy, as opposed to, I mean, we may not be in a mature enough environment in Trinidad. Like, I know in the UK they have energy companies, so they're companies that buy and sell electricity to make money on trading platforms and that type of thing. But what would you say to someone who's excited about the oil and gas industry and wants to get into it? What would you say to them? Go for it? Or,
first, I always say to any student, if you have a passion, follow your passion, do it very well, you'll always be employed. If you have a passion, follow your passion, do it very well, you will always be employed. Okay. That's the first thing. No matter what the passion is. The passion is, so now if you have a passion, understand the environment. So if you are going to be doing a program and you have interest in energy, chances are you'll be transitioning from oil and gas into renewables wherever you go. That's going to happen. How fast it happens depends on where you land. But we know that, for example, for 10 years now, we may all be producing oil and gas. We wouldn't necessarily be in Trinidad and Tobago, wherever to be producing oil, but you'll all be producing oil for many years to come. It'll be less and less, yes. So therefore, you need to pack in your bag of kits, your kit of packing for the career journey, make sure you have oil and gas and renewables. That's the first thing. Also, understand your environment. Don't be surprised by the changes which you will encounter. And also, I would say to most young people now who are launching out in a career, When I started as petroleum engineer, I worked for petroleum engineer in one area, albeit in different parts of the company for a long time. Chances are now people coming into industry now or into the world of work will have probably 5 or 6 different types of different jobs. The idea of getting one job and being that for that has gone, and the world of industry, world of work is different. That's going to be changing. So prepare them for that changing landscape. Make them prepare themselves with the right types of courses and understand the environment in which they're going to go. Right. But yes, if you want to do oil and gas, you do it very well, you'll find a job.
Yeah, and I think that is something that my parents said to me, and I think I've heard. I mean, there is a certain amount of frustration out there with young graduates. I have this degree, and I can't find, a petroleum engineering job or something like that. And in some ways, I don't know what to say, but in other words, I will say, which is what I say to people, is that there are lots of transferable skills that you're not thinking about. I know that with physics, there's the mathematical side, there's the statistical side. You could go into accounting, you could go into a whole bunch of different things. I'm not too sure with engineering, but with petroleum engineering, I know it's a lot of mathematics, statistics, modeling, that type of thing. So there's a lot of applications. But yeah, so we'll circle back to that if we can. So people who've done degrees who can't find a position. But you have a few minutes again. But what do you think is the biggest change moving from industry into academia? What was your biggest change for you moving from between those two?
What I found, academia allows you to see the world in possibilities. In that respect, there are similarities between academia and industry, sometimes, all right? Now, this highlights how industry can work with academia. So like I mentioned about the R&D and that low level of R&D we have in Trinidad versus what other countries. And that's an area, I think, where I think industry is missing a great opportunity to study the possibilities through its link with academia. So I think that link with academia and industry is one where industry can benefit and academia benefit as well. As a good symbiotic relationship, because that's what academics like to study things and to like to come up with solve problems and solutions and find solutions. And that's what industry wants to get done. So I would think that next between academia and industry is very important. I remember seeing, in fact, I was talking to a team from a university in Canada. I think it was Prince Edward Island University. And in that university, throughout that, even from the first and second and third years, those students have links working on very small projects sometimes with industry in a local area. Maybe some person with a factory who has one problem to be solved, he goes to the university, or he or she goes to the university, and they work on the problem. But it's that link with industry and academia, I think, is one which I think there's a great deal of opportunity there, which going a begging.
What do you think is the biggest problem for academics getting that link to the energy industry in Trinidad?
What?
The greatest challenge, I should say, or issue?
Well, you have to have two open doors, all right? And sometimes I don't know which door is shut more tightly, whereas the academic door is shut very tightly, because academic could tend to think, well, they say, well, they know it all. And on the other hand, you got industry believes, well, they don't know anything. So you have two shut doors there, right? So you gotta open those doors up.
Right.
And one way of getting to that point, by the way, is that so for example, my experience has been, we have in our program at UTT, we have all our programs, we have industry advisory counselors. Industry advisory counselors, and they give advice, and we take the advice, and that requires two people it's humility on the part of both sides, but yes, to open that door up and to try things. And you see, as a country that having not spent a lot of money in R&D, we aren't given to researching things, I think. And that's something which we need to do a lot more of. And it helps you in times when you want to find a new place to go, new things to do.
Yeah. And we are in that time right now. We are in that time where we need to find new places to go and new things to do.
And we should always be in that time. We should always be in that time.
Because I think
always be restless. Be restless to the next place you want, next thing you want to do to add to your portfolio. Always be restless.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I mean, one of the greatest things I heard was when there was a company called Ryanair, which was in Ireland.
Yes.
And they were a budget airline. And they got a student to build their entire website for selling plane tickets for nothing. Yes. And that is why they were able to start for the first time in Europe selling plane tickets completely online at a very low price to as many people as possible. So again, it was, as you said, this partnership that existed in Ireland between industry and universities, where industry would approach university would approach industry and say, I want to do this, give me your data or give me this, and I'll go off and try to come up with something that will help you. Yeah. I think that's something we as industry have to start thinking about more. Instead of give this problem to some guy to look at for 2 years, no, we can get a student to do this. Here's your data, you guide the process. Yeah.
And you have used the D word, which is critical for academia, the data. A reluctance to sharing data. Because if you want to study a problem, you want to make sure the environment is right. So you want to make sure, and data can be controlled. Yeah, this is confidentiality around data, but I think we do not have an open enough approach to sharing data in TNT, and that is, to me, holds back what we have done. If you look at other parts of the world, it's different. You can actually go onto a website right now and see the drilling program for a number of wells in some countries, just to show you all the drilling program. You can just see it, anyone can see it. And that country has a very active petroleum industry, because the more data you share, more people know, and the more people will spend and get involved. Now, so it's an approach to data and guarding the data very jealously, which sometimes, to me, holds us back from moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that is, I don't know how to solve that, because we're working in Trinidad and working in other places. There is a
share the data and share the data and measure the activity which you develop, which you generate, not the revenue from data which you have.
Yeah. So yes. So we'll close it off here, in that I've been working with some petroleum engineers and some geologists, and I know that in my experience with my current company, where you have great symbiotic relationships between production, reservoir, petroleum reservoir, and geologists, geophysicists, things work beautifully. How do you think, as societies, the SP and the GSTT could work more together to bring, quote unquote, more value to Trinidad and to the energy industry?
Well, I've always worked very closely.
What can we do better?
Well, great question. Now, I've always worked with SP. I've been in SP for 50 years. I started the SP when I was at Imperial as a student, and I'm still a member of the SP. In fact, last year I joined that. It's called a Legion of Honor. People who have been in the SP for 50 years and more. Anyway, so I've done that. And I've also worked with a lot of colleagues from the GSTT. I think the SP and the GSTT have a responsibility to educate the public on the energy industry and on its shifts. Most people in this country do not know how the energy industry works, even though it's been working in this country for over 100 years. We haven't been enough to educate them, because that understanding may play a role in the kind of expectation which they have from the industry. The fact that it matures and it goes through life as a life cycles, people don't even understand what that is and what that takes. They don't understand what it means when you have made a discovery. Well, is it tomorrow morning we get some money? Or what does discovery mean?
Yeah, what does dragon mean? When is it going to come through? how is that
And-
going to affect our lives? Yeah.
And having found something, you say, well, you have looked for it for the last few years, you haven't found anything. Well, those are exploration costs. And having found something, what's the development cost? What's the timing? And also, yes, so we have not done enough for the SPE and the GSTT. That's an opportunity which we have to actually educate the country
Public education.
about the industry. Right?
Yeah.
Because once you have an understanding, then that could really empower them to be able to identify opportunities.
Right. Because I had a friend of mine who said that to me. He's like, I've lived in this country or been a Trinidadian for a long time. And it's only when I came to work in the industry, I realized how much innovation there was, how much work was done, what, things like the Point-of-Pear refinery represent, in terms of what it was, what its legacy was, what it did, and how it affected people's lives. Because if you weren't in the industry, you just didn't know. So I think that's a great point. We need to, keep talking, get out there, probably get on TV, get on the internet, keep people informed, and yeah.
And going out to the schools and for example, we talk about transition. What is that really? Is that a binary process, or is it something which is going to be gradual? If so, gradual and driven in what ways? What are we transitioning from? All those things, and it doesn't have to be very complicated, but because they always say if you don't have, so just explain it simply to the people in the primary school so they understand what it is about. So we need to do that. And that's something which GSTT and SPE need to do even right now as we approach the transition.
Yeah.
So
I know both societies have an outreach program.
Yes.
But I think, to start talking, maybe we need to start speaking about that. How does, this is a rock, this is geology, but how is this affecting your life? And what is the life cycle?
Different levels of you have different levels of engagement which are appropriate to the people. So you have involvement in primary school, you have engagement at secondary school, different engagement, different publics. And how do you engage and make them understand these? Because the more people understand, the better they can handle the future. The future is not a black box which you could fear, but it's something which you can use.
Yeah, and people probably feel more in control, and they'll understand the industry and the ups and downs and what happens.
Empower them with knowledge.
Yeah. Empower them with knowledge. That is a great point to kind of end on. So Dr. Alleyne, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything that you want to say out to the people on the internet? We're going to put this on YouTube. We're going to share it within our members. Anything you want to end on?
It's wonderful talking to people about the industry, and just talk to one person. He spoke to me today. I hope he spoke to other people as well, because people have different views, and there are different views, and that is one thing which the world is full of views, and there are many views, and just take it all in, and move forward. But thank you very much. It's lovely talking to you about this. I know that you have come from a very strong geology family. I think I know your senior, Mr. Gabriel.
Yes.
So
I will say that it's been a pleasure having this discussion with you about your career, the industry, where things have come from, where they're going, and we're gonna have a number of people. So Krishna Prasad is next. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, sir. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for watching GSTT Energy Beginnings and Legends. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And keep in touch at the GSTT on Instagram and the Geological Society of Trinidad and Tobago on Facebook. Catch issues of the Hammer newsletter on our website at thegSTT.org. And look out for more episodes of GSTT Energy Beginnings and Legends, celebrating our geological foundation and future, coming soon.